Hi, I'm Laura Fell, and welcome to my interview series talking mental health and creativity. This week, I'm joined by writer, journalist, and radio host Precious Adesina. Precious is a journalist for The Telegraph and has written for many other publications, including The Financial Times, The Economist, BBC, The New Statesman, Vice, The Independent, and The Metro. She's also given talks on arts journalism at Whitechapel Gallery and Nottingham Contemporary, and has recently started her own monthly radio show, One Thing, on Nettle Radio, where she speaks with musicians, DJs, and others in the creative world about one thing they are passionate about outside of their career. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So I guess initially it might be helpful just to start talking a little bit about your experience of mental health when you first kind of started to become aware of any kind of problems you were experiencing, kind of charting that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So I originally probably realized that I had anxiety in my second year of university. Mm-hmm. And at the moment I realized a lot of things started to make sense. Like I'd had a panic attack before, and then, I'd had loads of sleepless nights. I couldn't even count. There was one summer where I was sleeping like 2 or 3 hours a night for like a month or two. So yeah, there was a lot going on. And so I spoke to the university to get some therapy. I only ended up having like 3 sessions. And then they mentioned that I might have a bit of anxiety and low self-esteem. And it all started to make sense from then on. All the different things that I had that were going on internally. But even despite that, I didn't really get any other sort of like help. I, would often go to the doctor with like some sort of issue. Like it might be like, I might have like a lump in my throat, or I'm feeling a certain sort of way. And they'll just be like, maybe you're stressed. And then they would like send me on my way, like maybe, relax a little. And then when I was doing my master's, I got an amazing internship and I was so excited because it was like for a big newspaper, and I had like a massive panic attack like a few days before, and I was really surprised by that because I was super excited. Everything was going well. My master's was going well. So I think
kind of didn't make sense for you.
Yeah, basically. And I called the doctor because at first I didn't even know, because I didn't know before that those were panic attacks. I only actually properly realized it was a panic attack when I had that one, because it was so big, and I called the doctor in a panic because I didn't know what was going on entirely. And I explained I'd had this feeling before, and then she was like, yeah, you had a panic attack, but you can go to the doctor. I went to the doctor the next day, and they were just like, I think you need to relax. And that was about it. So I started to get really frustrated after a while, because it was like, clearly something is going on. So when I moved house, I went to my GP, and I mentioned, the feelings that I've been having, and he recommended that I get CBT. So the CBT was very helpful, but I felt like I also needed, to talk to someone, and have because CBT is obviously helping with managing stress. But
it's very practical, isn't it? And was just on the NHS, you did the CBT?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And so that worked perfectly, but I felt like I needed to chat through, experiences that I've had in the past. So I decided to get therapy. And then eventually, the therapy worked, but I just felt that there was feelings that I was having that weren't going away. And eventually I went on antidepressants and for the anxiety. And going on the antidepressants for the anxiety was actually perfect, because that, coupled with therapy and meditation and yoga, I felt like that mellowed me out. And that was something that was all this year, but everyone I've spoken to has noticed a transformation in me as a person. So I think it was the right decision.
For sure. I guess I just wanted to come back to one of the things you were saying there about, I guess, that frustration with GPs kind of saying, well, just relax, because it's easier. It's much easier to say that than to do it, right? And I guess I'm also aware, and people kind of listening and tuning in might kind of resonate with this, that it's a difficult thing to do, to kind of go make an appointment and say, I'm struggling with this, or I'm having this feeling that I don't understand. And then to be met with a response that feels, I guess like you're being fobbed off or not taken seriously or kind of given the time to talk about it. It can put you off doing it again. And I just wondered how that was for you to kind of be met with that response.
Definitely, it was quite frustrating. And so when I, like, for example, when I finally asked, okay, I need proper like advice and help with my GP, the only reason why I ended up being so straightforward is because I'd spoken to a couple of friends who had had similar, like not necessarily similar experiences with the GP, but similar like mental health experiences that I was having, and they had been treated a lot faster. And I was told by them to just go there and say exactly what I want. So the first time I went, I was like, I feel like I have anxiety and I want something to be done about it. And then when I decided to go on antidepressants, after doing loads of research, I just said, look, this is what I want. And I had to be like quite straightforward about it. And it was really frustrating because it was like, if I knew that being straightforward like that would get me what I needed, I could have done that so many years ago and it would have made my life so much easier a long time ago, because the way I feel now would have been great to feel that years ago rather than dealing with anxiety in a way that wasn't really doing anything for me when I was growing up.
But it's interesting because even that kind of puts the onus on you as the kind of like patient, and I guess it's this idea of kind of the provision, and kind of this comes back to kind of what services are offered and the extent to which kind of GPs go into detail about that. And yeah, it's interesting. That's kind of you taking the responsibility of, if I knew I had to do that, but you could also argue that, perhaps it would have been helpful if services are made more available to all of us, if kind of this is talked about more.
Yeah, definitely. I always wonder why, like, I think because doctors are so busy with something like anxiety, it's especially when you're talking to a student, it can be easy to be like, oh my gosh, they have exams, they're stressed, rather than, dealing with the fact that, how long have you been feeling this way, and all those questions, because they have so much to do. But then again, it's like you do want someone to take the time and actually listen to what you're going through. So it's a difficult one, because I don't want to blame anyone for it taking so long, but I feel like if they had listened to me, because it was many occasions that I was going to hospital saying that I had this, I had that, and then them saying, oh, it sounds like you're stressed. And eventually that's what made me realize I need to do something, because I would think that I'm ill and then I'll be like, actually, you're just stressed. And so it's like, okay, this is like the 5th time this has happened to me in a few years. I've gone to a doctor, and this, what I thought was an illness or something, was just me being stressed. So yeah.
And I know you were talking about kind of this transformation in terms of where you feel you're at now with your anxiety, but I wondered if you would mind talking a bit about, I guess, where it was at its height, kind of how that was for you day to day. You talked about panic attacks, you talked about kind of insomnia and, effect on your sleep. Kind of what did that look like when the anxiety was in its peak?
Yeah, so I guess there were different peaks, because the sleepless nights one, which was very frustrating, was years ago. That was my after my first year of university. I got a job at uni, and they said I wasn't doing as well as they wanted, but they told me what the problem was, because it was just like one of those jobs where you call alumni and ask for donations, and I wasn't getting enough donations. So like your next shift, like we'll decide on that one. And I actually did really well after next shift, and then I ended up doing that job throughout university. But the stress of knowing that could have been my last shift, just completely, ruined my sleep. I was having like 2 hours sleep for the rest of the summer, despite the fact that the issue had passed. I think part of that was because I didn't really understand why I was having sleepless nights. I think it became more stressful. And there was a time where, like before university, where I also had sleepless nights. And so I didn't know how if other people were going through that or not. So it was kind of hard to know whether it was normal or not, because I wasn't able to compare my experiences to other, because I wasn't really like mentioning it to my friends, not in a way that I was embarrassed about my sleepless nights, but it was just because it was so frustrating. I kind of wanted to ignore it.
Right.
So that was one. Then the panic attacks, I think the worst one was the one I mentioned about before my internship. And because like during that internship, I would still get the start of a feeling of a panic attack, like all the time. And that lasted.
Horrible sinking feeling, isn't it?
Yeah. That lasted about 6 months. So past when I'd finished the internship, when I was doing a different internship, I was getting that feeling for so long.
And it's so interesting, as you were saying, kind of how displaced it can feel when everything's going well. You know, this internship, you know, kind of uni is going well, and yet there's this kind of, I don't know, like this anxiety being somatized in panic attacks or something. I guess I wondered, you were talking about the CBT being quite helpful, I guess, for practically coping, but the therapy helping you to kind of understand where that anxiety was coming from, or what was that triggered it.
Yeah, basically. And I think there's a host of reasons why speaking to my therapist, but I think it's really good to like have like someone who's there, like listening to like the real issues that, you know, at the core of it, like what could have resulted in that. And it's not necessarily to say that everyone has these big grand reasons why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. But I kind of acknowledge that I might have been through some things in my life like that might have resulted in me having anxiety. And obviously the biggest one, which I can mention, is obviously my dad passing away, because I feel like that was probably after that where it went from being like kind of like me being like, growing up, I did realize I was anxious because my friends would make jokes about me being like paranoid that they were talking about them, and I found it really funny. But then after, because they were like, obviously we're not talking about you. But then after that, I think that's when it became a very noticeable thing, I think. So, yeah.
And in terms of kind of the timeline of your dad passing and the kind of anxiety starting at university, what's the timeline there?
So it was very close. My dad passed away in my last year of my A levels. And then I had a gap year where I lived in Senegal. But then I did have loads of experiences like before starting university. Like the first proper big sleepless nights was when I was living in Senegal. The first panic attack I now know was before an exam, like after my dad had passed away. But then I also had another one when I was in Senegal, but then I just didn't know what these were properly. So it was hard to identify, oh yeah, these were panic attacks, until I had that big one. And then it suddenly like started to make proper sense.
Yeah, connecting it all up. Because I guess the thing is with anxiety, it's a feeling that makes you feel so out of control, isn't it? And I guess there's something, coming back to what you were saying about therapy, and it's how I conceptualize therapy, that if we can make these things conscious and understand where they're coming from or tie it all up, there's a sense of regaining control in that. That's kind of an empowering process. And I guess it balances out that lack of control that anxiety kind of floods us with when we feel it, right?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like understanding it has like, it is the biggest thing, like the power that you can have, because once you understand where it's coming from and how to deal with it, you kind of, it doesn't feel like it's controlling you anymore. Especially because sometimes it would make it hard for me to like do my job. Like I would be so stressed out that I wouldn't be able to like write, or it would just take me longer to write. And now I can just like, I don't get that stressed feeling when I'm writing anymore in the same way that I used to.
Can you give me a bit of an overview of what else has helped? You kind of mentioned other stuff around kind of meditation and yoga, and I guess helpful for people watching to hear what other people have tried and what people have found worked for them with anxiety.
Yeah, definitely. So I've tried loads of things. I've been meditating since I was young, but I've now made it like a proper big part of my life, like try to do at least some meditation each day. And that's been really helpful in keeping me like relaxed and grounded, and like kind of giving me a moment to like reflect or like relax. because obviously life can get really busy. And then yoga has just been great because it's relaxing, it's exercise, it's everything. I also run a lot. So I do a lot of exercise, which is very helpful in terms of keeping me relaxed and at bay. And I always have done loads of exercise. And I do notice a difference when I don't do exercise and when I do. Like, I feel so much calmer when I do in comparison to when I don't. And then obviously the antidepressants for the anxiety was really helpful because it just took away loads of the physical feelings. And that was something that I really wanted, because so it was during the pandemic. It was only like in February that I went on this medication,
right?
And that was because I realized that like in December that I was like shaking, and I didn't really get why I was shaking, so I was fine, but I just felt like very shaky. And I was just like, okay, like I need something that's going to stop all these physical symptoms, and going on it helped. It actually just made me, feel more relaxed and happier as well. So I don't think it's for everyone, but I think it was really helpful for me.
But that's important to hear, though, I think, because I do think that there can be quite a stigma around medication, or certainly kind of you hear all these awful stories, and I guess you don't balanced out here those kind of stories where people find it really helpful, or people kind of find say it takes away enough of the physical symptoms that you have the emotional headspace to do the work around kind of understanding what's going on here, kind of where's this coming from, how can I preempt it going forward,
Yeah, definitely.
I guess going back to work, I wondered, thinking about mental health and creativity, obviously you're a writer, and working as a journalist, you're constantly on deadlines, and we're talking about anxiety and stress. So how did that impact work when kind of the anxiety was in a place where you felt you had less control over it?
I think it did make it really hard, because it meant I would sometimes... There's two ways that it went. Sometimes it would motivate me to work so hard, because I'd be like, oh, what if I don't do this? What if I don't do that? And I would just put all my heart and soul into like my work, because I wanted the best possible outcome. Because I think with anxiety, you can also think about all the terrible things that could happen if you don't do something well. So it pushes you to like do really well. Which that part of it I'm grateful for, but then it also can be like very counterproductive, in that you're so stressed out when you're doing something that you can't do it to the standard that you want to do it.
I guess it's that thing with anxiety, kind of when you're in that state of hyperarousal, it's a bit like a glass of water filling up, isn't it? And kind of once it's at this point, you get that flood of cortisol and adrenaline, and it's like you're done for, because you're in that state then, and you can't really access clarity. And like, I guess I wondered, like with the CBT, kind of, is there anything that you still use now that taught you about kind of bringing yourself kind of back down from that level, back down out of that anxiety state?
There's a kind of thing of like catastrophizing, for example, like when there's a problem, for example, before I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. Like, I think of all the worst possible scenarios, and like the CBT taught me that, is this something that I can do something about, or is it not? Like, is this a real issue, or is it not? So it's like, okay, so if this is a problem, can I do anything about it? If I do this thing, will it improve the situation or not? If it's a problem that I can't do anything about, then I just kind of, you can just have to leave it how it is, really. And it kind of just makes dealing with problems so much easier when you have the headspace to actually think about, like, what can I actually do about this? What can I not? And not just thinking of the worst possible thing.
Yeah, it sounds like it's about slowing down, I suppose, because when we're in anxiety, we're kind of racing, and it sounds like what you were talking about with the CBT, it was just kind of pausing and almost stepping back, so you're looking at yourself in the situation rather than being caught up.
And then one great thing was the kind of the one thing she asked me to do was to also, like, if I was having bad thoughts about myself or about life, kind of just being like spending 5 minutes saying, yeah, you are stupid, you are this, and kind of like doing that made me, it makes you realize how, like, ridiculous you're being, you know what I mean, in a way. Like, no, you don't, like, you aren't, it just kind of giving yourself the moment to have those horrible thoughts for like a whole 5 minutes, it just takes it away from the rest of the day, if you know what I mean. And then you kind of realize that, you know, you don't actually feel that way.
I see. So like letting yourself be with them and kind of say them so that you can kind of take the power out of them.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. And I think with the catastrophizing and the rumination, that kind of pause button is a really helpful kind of thing to take away as well, isn't it? Of just kind of, can I do anything about this? And you could argue that if the answer is no, that could be anxiety provoking. But I think often in a strange way, knowing that we don't have control and being able to let go can feel quite calming. You know,
yeah, like, in a way. But that's the, you know, I think that's kind of the excitement of life. You don't want everything to be, you know, problemless and easy and straightforward, do you? Because then, you know, nothing feels like an achievement. So, or nothing, like, it's just, you don't want life to be completely easy either. So catastrophizing every situation just will suck all the joy out of, you know, life as well. So yeah, it's a difficult one.
When in terms of kind of anxiety now, is it still something that you kind of live with day to day? Is it something that you can kind of preempt, that idea of the glass filling up? Are you able to kind of catch it and kind of bring that level down when you feel it building up? Is it something you're aware of building now?
Yeah, sometimes I do feel it like building, and it will last like for a few days. And I still get into a mindset of being really irritating, like maybe the feeling will never go away, and it always does. But the one good thing I've done is, like, if I am feeling that way, I accept it. And that is like the hard thing. Like, you accept, okay, this is how I'm feeling. I'm not gonna like tell myself off for feeling this way. I'm not going to like force myself not to feel it. Like, feeling those feelings and allowing them to like be there actually is easier to get past than kind of like trying to force yourself to not feel it, if you know what I mean. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, because I also think that, you know, like anxiety, you know, it's an emotion that we're all going to experience many times, right, in the duration of our lives. And I guess there's also something about, like, when we've experienced it in a kind of chronic way, then our body starts to have a kind of, you know, when we feel it again, kind of, I can't feel this feeling. And I guess what you're talking about, of kind of naming, okay, I feel really anxious right now. This is a feeling and it's difficult, but it will pass. It's almost building resilience to that, isn't it? Kind of, because if we try and push something away, short term, great, we don't have to deal with it, we don't have to experience it. But in the long term, we're shooting ourselves in the foot in a way, because we're not building any tolerance to that feeling of knowing I can feel this, I can experience it, and I can come out the other side.
Yeah, basically. And then it just starts to manifest itself in other ways if you like force yourself to like not have those feelings. So yeah.
Well, yeah, like panic attacks, I often use this, I mean, my poor clients hear this analogy all the time, but I always use this analogy like pushing a beach ball underwater, you know, it pops up somewhere else. And I think it's that thing when we try and suppress something. Absolutely. In terms of kind of the writing, you were talking about motivating you, kind of, there was a fine line between it motivating you to kind of do better, and then the ruminations kind of holding you back. Where do you feel you're at with it now? And is it, I mean, I also wondered if it's something you would ever write about.
Yeah, I do think about, I'll answer those two separately. I'll speak about the writing about first. Like, I do think about that, but I think the one thing, what I get worried about as a woman and a Black person is that, you know, as a writer, you are expected to talk about your like write about your emotional distress quite a lot. So that is like my apprehension with writing about it, because I don't want to be like, I find that I just don't want to end up being someone who's just consistently writing about like my own personal distress. I don't really do it very much at all. So, but I just don't want to get into that rabbit hole. But another thing is, I do want to, you know, write about it because other people are having these experiences and not understanding. And I think it's also a case of like a lot of like Black people as well aren't getting the right sort of help to deal with that, because, you know, they are less likely to be given appropriate help in that respect. So there is that side to it. I think I will, eventually write something about it at one point, but I just don't want it to be a big part of what I'm writing about either. So that is that dichotomy that I have.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a conflict there of kind of this idea of the expectation and kind of understandably wanting to reject that, but also feeling like, okay, but it's important that people know. I guess it's something about normalizing it, isn't it? The more we talk about it like this, or kind of write these things, or kind of, you know, I certainly know that feeling when you read something and you identify with it. It's very reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. So it's something to think about, and probably that I would do. Like, I didn't think I'd be talking about my anxiety with you, and like this in this setting anyway. And here I am. So it's definitely something that I'm open to writing about.
I guess that kind of leads me on to the idea of kind of the stigma around the wider mental health conversation in general, you know, and kind of, as you say, you didn't think you'd be talking about it here in this kind of way with me. And I wonder how like that journey has been for you, because, you know, I was saying in another one of these series that I feel like even working as a therapist, when people ask me how I am and I'm not doing well, that I have to really fight that thing of like, oh yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, how are you? I'm good, you know, and I think it's so entrenched, I think, that idea of don't talk about it, you know, and I wonder how that journey's been for you of kind of, you were talking about when you were at university, you weren't necessarily talking to friends about things because it was something you were trying to push down. How has that changed for you over the years?
Yeah, definitely. Like growing up and at university, I think I found it hard to talk about these things like in detail, because I felt like it would paint me in a certain way, or, you know, I don't want people to look at me differently, for example. So I felt like this was something that I wanted to deal with on my own. And I don't think that is necessarily good in itself. And but as I have gotten older, not considerably older, but older, I've like been more open to talk about it with my friends. And the more I've actually spoken about it with my friends, the more I've realized a lot of them are going through similar things. And, you know, it actually doesn't change the way that people perceive you. Actually, most of the time, they see you as like stronger or some, you know, because you've been dealing with this like issue. But I also think part of it is because when what took me a long time to acknowledge, the reason why it took me a long time to acknowledge that anxiety might be what I have as well, is because my idea of anxiety, especially, you know, when you're watching kids TV, is that the anxious kid doesn't speak very much, you know, it doesn't go to like social events, and, you know, they you know, a lot of anxiety is like painted in a certain way, and it's like, okay, you know, I'm not like antisocial, I'm not this, I'm not, you know, those stigmas that, you know, I have friends. And so I felt like the way I was seeing it on TV was
Your
making
experience is excluded from that.
Yeah, it didn't seem that way. But then as I've grown up, I've realized that, you know, that isn't what anxiety is, or, you know, it isn't the entirety of what anxiety is anyway. You know, some people might have those experiences with anxiety, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the only kind of, you know, way that it is. Yeah.
When you were saying about kind of fearing people might see you differently were you to talk about it, I wondered if you could say a bit more kind of what those fears were, like kind of that fear of judgment. How were you kind of worried that you might be seen differently then?
Yeah, it was more of a case of like, I thought if I told people I was feeling this way, they would be scared to like have a proper conversation with me because they might upset me or something, or they might feel sorry for me, or, you know, just things like that, that they would treat me differently in some sort of way. And like looking back, it feels kind of crazy that I even felt that way, because like with my closest friends, I do talk about these things. But then again, you know, outside of my close circle, I don't. So I guess some of those feelings are still there in some sort of way. But yeah, like when I did talk to them about it, it hasn't changed anything. Obviously they ask me how I'm doing and, you know, if it's okay every once in a while, but they're not like, you know, treading on eggshells every time that they see me. Yeah.
I think that's such an important like experience to share, because I guess that fear narrative that stops us from talking to people about it. Because if I do this, they'll think this of me. I guess until that's disproven, it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And actually, as you say, most of the time, especially when we pick people that we trust, we're probably going to get a response that really rewrites that narrative. Where, as you say, it's not only that they didn't judge me for being these things, but actually the other side of it, kind of they see it as kind of strong, and they kind of see that vulnerability and want to meet it and kind of respect it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of that is also like the kind of people that you keep around you. So like I have such supportive like friends, a strong network of friends who are really, really great. And I think that kind of has contributed to me feeling more open about talking about these things, because I know that I don't have this fear of talking to my friends about my deepest, darkest secrets, because I know that they listen and they're not going to treat me differently having heard it. So that has like really, really helped me in being more open. So I do think part of it is surrounding yourself with the right kind of people.
Because another thing I've been talking about, obviously, is in this series is mental health and creativity and how they kind of intersect. And I guess that idea of, as you were saying, sometimes it can be a helpful vehicle. It sounds like in your case, kind of work was a welcome distraction at points of kind of high anxiety, but also kind of it can be a space to make sense of things. And I guess as a journalist, but also as a writer, I wonder if that maps onto your experience of whether it's something that kind of helped you to process what was going on for you, but something you've written about just personally for yourself.
Yeah, I think writing about your issues is like really great, and it doesn't necessarily mean writing about it for other people. Like writing about it for yourself, like I do that. Like I have kept a diary or written about like how I'm feeling today, especially because that was also part of like CBT. My therapist actually mentioned that I should do that more now, but I don't do it as much as I hope, but I do. And one of the things I have started doing, which I've enjoyed, is like fiction writing, and using, because like part of like learning how to write fiction is kind of like taking your daily experiences and then making them into a story. And so I've kind of enjoyed like using aspects of like my experiences with my day and then making it into a story. And in a way it kind of makes sense of situations as well, in a fun way, because you can alter it, you can change it, you can you can hone in on the good things, you can hone in on the bad things. So it's actually really great.
It kind of creates an anonymity that gives you more freedom to explore it.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that something you're going to be doing more of then?
That is something I want to do more of, fiction writing, which is why I'm writing fiction. I would absolutely love to. But part of me, I'm just someone who likes to do everything well. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm not there yet. So I haven't shared it with anyone or anything. But I think eventually I will. I once thought that about my journalism. So
yeah. And also picking up on something there that I think maybe a lot of people with anxiety would resonate with is that kind of perfectionist tendency as well. Kind of, I think that's something I know that I can struggle with kind of my anxious brain of kind of needing to do everything just right. And then it's kind of, if I can't do it right, then I have to do it again or not do it at all. Or I wonder if that's a bit of a hangover still for you for your anxiety.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes it can mean that I don't do things because I'm constantly like, oh, this has to be well. I can like forget about everything else in that situation. Like, so it has its good and bad, because it means that I do strive to do things well, which is, part of what makes me. But then it's also a case of like, I can sometimes let go of everything else outside of it. Like if I have a big project, I might not, like, especially when I was like a freelancer, I won't do anything else but that. I won't see my friends. I would just be like working. But I think, it's good. I think part of it is good to, strive for the best, but I think trying to find a balance between, what is a healthy level of striving for the best and what is, you being overly anxious is, a good balance that, it's a balance to find.
How do you work toward that balance? What kind of helps you to maintain that?
Well, it's about making a plan, and also just thinking about, like, I try to think about like how I'm balancing my life. So, am I exercising during the day? Am I seeing my friends? How much time are you spending working? In all the, these different things, and trying to make sure that nothing is, I'm not overdoing anything. Yeah.
Mm.
And it's easy to overdo stuff. Yeah.
So easy. And is that something then that kind of you find will drive you into anxiety? Is that a kind of trigger then for an anxious episode? Do you find when you're kind of overworked or overstretched, is that when it might tend to kind of come back?
Yeah. When I feel like I'm overworked or really like stressed out, I think that's when I notice it. Like I notice when I'm really stressed, because the first thing that I think about is like, everyone hates me, and then I'm like, oh my God, I'm feeling quite anxious, because obviously I know that's not true. But once I get to that thought, it's like, okay, I'm obviously like stressed out. And I think when I'm like stressed out or like anxious about work, I end up feeling as if every part of my life, or like when I just have a problem, I kind of make it as if every part of my life is a problem rather than just that thing. So it's like trying to get out of that mindset is like, just realizing this is the problem and not everything.
Yeah, because that all or nothing thinking, I guess, is another part of anxiety that
Yeah.
is so overwhelming. Because as you say, then it becomes everything's bad, or everything's kind
Yeah.
of control, or and kind of pulling back from that place.
Yeah.
I guess I just also wanted to ask about, in terms of, reflecting on your experience, and I guess your experience of navigating that stigma, what you would kind of suggest or advise to anyone watching that is experiencing anxiety and perhaps kind of feeling quite apprehensive about seeking help, or kind of not knowing where to start with that, kind of what you might advise.
I think it's the first step would be acknowledging that, there's something there that you feel isn't, how you want to be feeling. And then, figuring out what it is that you want the next thing to be, then maybe speaking to a friend, or, a GP, or, a therapist. I think everyone should do therapy, but I think, if you are feeling like anxious, therapy is a great way to like kind of deal with that, whether it's CBT or talking therapy. Obviously there's a range of therapies that you can get. Yeah, definitely.
Acknowledging it is I guess the first step there, isn't it? And I guess often the hardest step, and maybe that's also helpful to say about kind of, I think it's almost once you've made that initial contact either with a friend or a therapist, it's almost like, okay, I'm here now.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if that was your experience, but I think certainly for me in the past, just kind of finding a therapist and making that commitment, it's like, okay, I've done the hard bit now. Now I'm just going to show up and kind of stay in this space,
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think sometimes people assume that you should get therapy when you're feeling terrible. But I always feel like that's actually the hardest time to get therapy. Like starting it before you get to the terrible stage is so much easier than starting it when you're at the height of feeling bad. But obviously it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get it then. But like if you know that you have a tendency to feel a certain way, like don't wait until you are feeling that way again to get the therapy. Get it before, so that when you're in the moment, you're comfortable with your therapist and you're ready to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because obviously, if people are in crisis, that's not always possible. But I think I agree with you that I think there is this kind of misrepresentation of therapy that, you've got to be really kind of on your knees with the problem to deserve the space in some way. And I think that's so unhelpful, really. And actually kind of, I think whatever space you're in, I mean, obviously I'm deeply biased, but I think whatever space you're in, therapy is really helpful, for sure.
Yeah.
Preempting it. I guess it's that thing of, instead of being in a damage control mode of I'm in real crisis, how do I get out of this, which is obviously also important. It's kind of, I had this time a few months ago and I really want to put things in place to make sure that doesn't happen again, or that when it does happen again, I'm more prepared, or I don't stay in that space for as long, or
Yeah,
for sure.
I think the main thing is just, acknowledging it and taking those steps was the best thing that ever happened to me, really. And I feel like I've come out of it better version of myself. And it's really funny because sometimes, like, for example, when I was telling like my friend that I don't feel like I'm the best version of myself because of the anxiety, they were like, but I love the person that you are. And then it was really funny because I was like, that isn't really the point. Like, I'm not saying that I'm terrible, but the feelings that I'm feeling inside don't allow me to be the person that I want to be. And so, like, you know, taking those steps, I actually now feel like, okay, I am closer or there, you know, like I am feeling how I want to be feeling, and, you know, being the person that I want to be, for its good and for its bad, you know. Yeah, so it makes me really happy.
And it sounds like also kind of, if this feels fair to say, kind of less scared of your anxiety, that like when it comes back now, yes, there's that feeling that comes on that's kind of, is this going to go away, you know, but kind of also rationally knowing, well, it has every time before, back to the CBT kind of reality check, thinking, you know, like, okay, I've had this fear before, but every other time it's been disproved, it's a feeling that's passed, you know. So it's almost like there isn't such a, it's not as triggering now. There's resilience again, kind of when it comes back up. It's like, okay, it can feel more instructive of, okay, well, if I've got an anxiety spike, that's telling me something, that maybe the balance is off, or maybe that I'm working too hard, or maybe that I haven't exercised enough or seen enough friends and had enough kind of physical contact with people. So it's almost like, instead of seeing it as this kind of terrible thing, it's almost your body kind of trying to say, hey, look at this thing.
Yeah,
kind of,
definitely. You know. And I think one thing that has been so helpful in that is actually yoga, because like part of yoga is kind of like, they tell you like, oh, you know, acknowledge your feelings, don't fight it, you know what I mean, don't like tell yourself off for feeling this way, or, you know, if you're feeling like if your body is like shaking, like accept it, like don't fight it. And like that sort of thing. And I think that that trickles into, you know, the way that I like now think about my life as well, because it's like, okay, I'm upset, I'm not gonna fight that upset, I'm gonna acknowledge that I am upset, you know. Rather than being like, okay, I have to be happy 24/7, or I have to feel positive all the time, because no one does. And like, so trying to make yourself feel positive and happy 24/7 is a losing battle, really.
Yeah, and kind of, you know, I guess just accepting where you're at. I think if we're fighting something, it tends to stay around longer, you know. And I think if you just accept the feeling, it's that idea, if you can't move, you've got to go through the feeling, you can't go around it. But and the more you try to go around it, it's just kind of gonna persist. What is it? What you resist persists. Makes sense.
I think that's it.
You know, so kind of it feels like for you, one of the most important kind of things in kind of living with anxiety now is just acknowledging it when it comes up and taking the power out of it by doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, thank you so much.
This has been so great.
For your time.
It's so lovely speaking to you.
Yeah, and you.
I'll see you.
Darling. I'll see you soon. Thanks again. Bye.